Hi class, I'm Mr. Larachel and our lesson we are going to report are entitled Selecting Effective Employees. Selection is a process by which an organization chooses from a list of applicants to a person or person who best meet the selection criteria. In selecting effective employees, selecting applicants should meet or exceed the performance associated with the given job and contribute to the effective of the organization and perform quality and reliable work for the organization. In internal environmental circumstances influencing selection, the amount of type selection processes it uses to a hard-needed employees. Internal forces have profound influences on human resource function. Trade unions are formed to safeguard the interest of its member. Each organization's culture and conflicts, human resource practices need to be implemented that best fit the organization culture. In another structural complex organization with job titles but very few occupants, another characteristics of the organization that is an important determinant of the kind of selection system is developed.
Next topic for influences on selection process is the external environment. So when we say external environment, it is an equally important determinant of a kind of selection systems that an organization utilizes. Because not only are most organizations subject to federal employment laws and regulation, but there are many state-specific regulations that also affect what an organization can and cannot do in a selection system. In short, kapag sinabi nating external environment, meaning ito ay sa labas or outside of a company. And nangyayari ito kapag mababa ang rate ng trabaho. Pag nangyari ito, mahihirapan ng isang company or organization na tukuyin or akitin ang bilang ng mga taong kailangan nito. So, sa kabilang banda, ang ginagawa ng organization para masolusyonan ang problemang ito ay nagpo-focus sila sa pag-shifting or pagsala sa pinaka-karapat-dapat na empleyado na nababagay sa posisyong hinahanap nila. So, also, and you can see here in the slide the shifting process or the selection ratio, where the selection ratio is equals to number of applicants hired divided to the total number of applicants.
Reliability refers to how dependably or consistently a test measures a characteristic. If a person takes the test again, will he or she get a similar test score or a much different score? A test that yields similar scores for a person who repeats the test is said to measure. The reliability of a selection tool can be judged in a variety of ways. In practice, one common way to assess reliability ID to correlate the scores of applicants given the same test on two different occasions. This is called test-retest reliability and alternative form reliability. This is to determine by correlating scores from two alternate forms of the same test. An applicant score should not vary much according to which form of the test he or she happens to take. When a measuring tool relies on the judgments of people, such as in employment interview, reliability is often determined by using interaction reliability. This refers to extent to which two or more interviewers' assessments are consistent with each. Test-retest reliability or TRR is a measure of reliability obtained by administering the same test twice over a period of time to a group of individuals. Ibig sabihin nito, uulit-ulitin yung proseso ng test sa mga applicants. Kumbaga, yung reliability ba ay papaloob sa pagpili ng tamang aplikante. Pinakamababaw na example ng reliability test is yung pagsasaing natin ng bigas. If we are going to cook rice, ano ba ang proseso natin doon? After hugasan, di ba, sasabawan natin like kapag 3 cups of rice, mathematically 3 cups of water level din or yung measurement through our fingers. Ayan. Kapag yung proseso po na yon inulit-ulit natin, ang outcome or kalalabasan ng luto natin ay consistent, tama at maayos. Ganon din sa usaping reliability na kung saan ginamitan lang natin ang simplest example for you guys to easily understand what is reliability. So, meaning to say, yan nga. So, sa sinasabi ko, 3:3. So, ganun din po sa proseso ng reliability sa pagpili ng aplikante. At napaka-importante nun kasi nga, through retest reliability, dun po papasok yung makikitaan natin agad yung aplikante na siya po ay consistent sa kanyang mga sinagot sa mga naunang test. Kasi sabi ko nga a while back na yung retest reliability, ito po yung proseso na uulitin natin. Like, si applicant, bibigyan natin ng unang test. Kung ano yung magiging score na dyan, i-compare natin yon sa retest niya. So, same process lang din, same lang din yung questions na ibinigay, pero doon kasi natin malalaman kung consistent yung knowledge na alam ng isang aplikante. So, doon mo pa makikita yung reliability niya. Yun. So, ganon ang ibig sabihin ng reliability sa selection process.
Selection criteria. Before I start, let me define first what is selection criteria. Selection criteria describes the key qualifications, training, abilities, knowledge, personal attributes, skills, and experience necessary to do a job effectively. At the core of any effective selection system is an understanding of what characteristics are essential for high performance. This is where the critical role of job analysis is selection becomes most apparent, because that list of characteristics should have been identified during the process of job analysis and should now be accurately reflected on the job specification. Thus, from a performance perspectively, the goal of any selection system is to accurately determine which applicants possess the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics dictated by the job. Selection criteria, ito yung mga pamantayan sa pagpili kung ang isang aplikante ba ay karapat-dapat sa isang posisyon na kanyang ina-applyan sa isang trabaho. Ginagamit ito ng mga HR departments upang suriin ang kakayahan ng mga aplikante sa isang trabaho.
Exhibit 8-1, Categories of Criteria for Selection Decisions.
Categories of criteria. With these potential differences in mind, the criteria typically used by organizations for making selection decisions can be summarized in several broad categories, and those are the education, experience, physical characteristics, and other personal characteristics. Formal education. An employer selecting from a pool of job applicants wants to choose the person who has the right abilities and attitudes to be successful. One of the more common cost-effective ways to screen for many of these abilities is by using educational accomplishments as a surrogate for or summary of the measures of those abilities. For certain jobs, the employer may stipulate that the education is in a particular area of expertise, such as accounting or management. For a number of reasons, education leads to a greater work. The first is the more education often translates to more knowledge of a subject. Many careers requires a certain level of knowledge, and having an education is one way employers will evaluate your qualifications. A formal education program may help you set goals, provide best recommendations, and provide your employees with the skills they need to flourish in their professions. Importante ang formal education sa paghahanap or pag-a-apply ng work kasi may mga company na isa sa mga requirements ay college graduate. Siyempre, pag primary school lang natapos mo, hindi ka talaga kukunin. Much better pag college graduate ka or degree holder ka. Experience and past performance. Another useful criterion for selecting employees is experience and past performance. Many selection specialists believe that past performance on a similar job might be one of the best indicators of future performance. Employers may determine whether your current skills have prepared you to meet expectations and meet the requirements of the positions they're looking to fill. If they have a clear picture of your previous experiences, including how you have evolved professionally and succeeded. Hiring, while fully disregarding earlier performance, may result in a variety of concerns. A person hired only on potential, for example, may lack the fundamental talents required to fulfill the current functions and may not even reach this stage of exhibiting future potential due to poor performance in the beginning. Experience ang kadalasang hinahanap ng isang company kasi kung may experience ka na about sa trabaho na ina-applyan mo, matatanggap ka na. Hindi naman agad-agad matatanggap pero may possibility na matatanggap ka. And sa past performance naman, dapat maganda ang naging performance mo sa last job mo kasi isa na ito sa advantages mo para matanggap sa trabahong ina-applyan mo. Physical characteristics. In the past, many employers consciously or unconsciously used physical characteristics as a criterion. Studies found that employers were more likely to hire and pay better wages to tall men, and airlines choose flight attendants and companies hired receptionists on the basis of beauty or their definition of it. Many times, such practices discriminated against ethnic groups, older people, and people with disabilities. Marami din namang mga company na ang isang tinitingnan ay ang physical appearance. Tinitingnan nila kung suitable ka ba sa trabahong iyon. Lalo na kapag ang ina-applyan mo is more on physical. Kunwari, payat ka tapos mag-a-apply ka sa work na puro buhat. Sa tingin mo, kukunin ka kung sa katawan mo pa lang parang hindi mo na kaya yung trabahong ina-applyan mo. Personal characteristics and personality type. The final criterion category is a catch-all that includes personal characteristics and personality type. Personal characteristics includes marital status, sex, age, and so on. Some employers have preferred stable married employees over single people because they have assumed that married people have a turnover rate. On the other hand, other employers might seek out single people for some jobs, since a single person might be more likely to accept a transfer or lengthy overseas assignment. Once na matanggap ka sa work na ina-applyan mo, dapat maging maayos pakikitungo mo or pakikisama mo sa mga kasama mo sa trabaho. Know how to respect your coworkers. Your personality influences both your strengths and weaknesses. This reflection reflects not just your present technical talents, but also how you interact with or behave in the presence of others, and how to best match this to future work opportunities. Personality influences whether people are employed, promoted, or hired, whether they help others or recognized as leaders.
Selection process. In the past, selection was often thought to be an easy decision. Decisions were based on the subjective likes or dislikes of the boss. Selection tools were designed to aid this gut reaction. Today, selection is viewed much more than simply relying on institution. The selection decision is usually perceived as a series of steps through which applicants pass. At each step, more applicants are screened out by the organizations, or more applicants accept other job offers and drop from the list of applicants. Exhibit 8.2 illustrates a typical series of steps for the selection process. Exhibit 8.2 Typical selection decision process. First step, preliminary screening, application blank, and interview. Second step, employment interview. Third step, employment test. Fourth step, reference check and recommendations. Fifth step, selection decision. And last, physical examination. This series is not universal. For example, government employers test a step to instead of step 3 as do some private and third sector employers. It is important to note that few organizations use all steps may be performed concurrent or at about the same time. Generally speaking, the more important the job, the more step is like to be used formally. First, step 1. Preliminary screening. The most common first step is any selection process usually involves asking an applicant to complete an online or paper application form. Application blanks, as these are typically referred to, vary in length of sophistication. Nearly all application blank ask for enough information to determine whether the individual is minimally qualified for the position. For example, education blanks can be useful in screening tool type professional certification. In this way, the application blank can eliminate the need of subsequent makes the selection process far more efficient. First, by reducing the number of applicants that we need to be interviewed, and second, by allowing interviewers to focus on other kinds of information that are perhaps more difficult to obtain. Step 2. Employment interview. Other than application blank, the interview is definitely the selection technique most often encountered by persons applying for a job in the United States. Not surprisingly, the topic of interviews has generated hundreds of research studies over the past 20 years, covering such topics as verbal and nonverbal behavior, personality characteristics, impression management, interviewer-interviewee similarity, and pre-interview impressions. Because interviews are so widely used to select new employees, they must maximize their potential for identifying qualified persons. Two strategies for making the most out of an interview are: first, fairly structuring the interview to be reliable and valid, and second, training managers to use the best available interviewing techniques. Step 3. Employment test. A technique gets some organization used to gather their selection decisions for employment tests. An employment test is a mechanism that attempts to measure certain characteristics of individuals. These characteristics range from aptitude, such as manual dexterity, to intelligence personality. It can be very expensive to develop a test to measure this kind of characteristic. For this reason alone, many employers purchase existing tests for the varieties of sources. These are literally hundreds of published tests from which to those, and some of the more useful tests cost as little $1 per applicant. And interested in selecting a test for use in personal selection can begin with the mental measurement yearbook, which summarizes many of the tests and included a brief evaluation of their effectiveness. Step 4. Reference check and recommendation. If you have ever applied for a job, you were probably asking to provide a list of people whom the organization could contact to get information about you. These references might have been work-related or they might have been personal. In either case, to the extent that you provide the organization with a list of people who you believe would generally speak favorable about you. Fairly, when you're given the opportunity, does someone knowingly include the name of a reference who will give a negative impression to the new organization? This built-in bias in favor of applicants is precisely the reason why general references seldom provide an organization with meaningful information about applicants. Equally important, however, are genuine concern over the legality of providing such information. Giving confidential information about the former employee could be construed as a violation of the employee's right to privacy, and giving a negative recommendation open the references up to the documentation lawsuit. Most reasonable people would agree that managers should not be allowed to lie about the former employee or to be malicious by providing reference information. On the other hand, not all references can be positive, and managers should not have to fear being sued simply for being honest about former employee. Step 5. Selection decision. Upon completing step 1 to 4 of selection process, as illustrated in exhibit, typically 2 or 3 job candidates are finalists for the position. At this point, the hiring manager needs to decide which of these finalists should receive the offer of employment. In general, the offer is extended to the individual who seems to represent the best fit for the job and the organizations. In addition to these 2 criteria, hiring managers also like to choose candidates who project a high level of motivation. There are 2 major approaches used by organizations to arrive at the selection decision: the multiple hurdle approaches and compensatory model. The multiple hurdle approach is the process of reaching a selection decision by acquiring job candidates to meet requirements on each stage of the process, in the screening, interview, employment test, etc. In the selection process. Step 6. Physical examination. Careful adherence to the Americans with Disabilities Act indicate that physical examination can be used to screen out unqualified individuals. Generally should be required on after a conditional offer of employment has been made.
Types of manager. The particular types of employment tests that are used in organization vary with the type of employee being hired. Many of the techniques that have been discussed in this video chapter, the interview for example, are common to most occupation, others, and such cognitive ability testing are used with a wide assortment of jobs and occupations, ranging from blue-collar to marginal position. However, because of the cost associated with a bad decision and the complexities of managerial work, organizations frequently expend more time, effort, and money hiring middle to upper level executives than they spend hiring for position lower on the organizational chart. Of the best-known multiple selection methods used for these purposes is the assessment center. The assessment center was first used by the German military in World War II. An assessment center uses a wide array of methods, including several interviews, work samples and simulation, and many kinds of paper and pencil. Tests of abilities and attitudes. Exhibit 8 to 11 presents briefly a typical 2-day assessment center schedule. Most assessment centers are similar in a number of areas. Number 1. Group of approximately 12 individuals are evaluated. Individual and group activities are observed and evaluated. Number 2. Multiple methods of assessment are used: interviewing, objective testing, projective testing, games, role-playing, and other methods. Number 3. Assessors are usually a panel of line managers from the organization. They can, however, be consultant or outsider trained to conduct assessment. Number 4. Assessment centers are relevant to the job and thus have high appeal because of this relevance. Exhibit 8 to 11. Assessment Center Schedule 21 and 2 days. Day 1. Orientation of approximately 12 rate. B. break up into groups of 4 or 6 to play management simulation games. C. Psychological testing measure verbal and numerical skills. D. Interview with raters. And E. Small group discussion of case incidents. And Day 2. A. Excuse me. Individual decision-making exercise raters are asked to make a decision about some problem that must be solved. And B. In-basket exercise. And C. Role-playing of performance evaluation interview. And D. Group problem solving. Day 3. A. Individual case analysis and presentation. And B. Evaluation of other raters.
Of managers, as a result of assesses, participating as a part of a group and as individuals, completing exercises, interviews, and tests. The assessors have a large volume of data on each individual. Individuals are then evaluated on a number of dimensions, such as organizational and planning ability, decisiveness, flexibility, resistance to stress, poise, and personal styles. The raters' judgments are consolidated and developed into a final report. Each assesses performance in the center can be described if the organization wants this type of report. Portions of the individual reports are feedback to each assesses, usually by one or more members of the assessment team. Because it is an integrated attempt to measure a variety of characteristics of managers, the assessment center report permits the organization to make a number of determinations about human resources. And these are the examples. Qualification of individuals for particular positions. Promotability of individuals. How individuals function in a group. Type of training and development needed to improve behaviors of individuals. How good assessors are in observing, evaluating, and reporting on the performance of others. Overall, the results of research on assessment centers have indicated that they are a valid way to select managers, but they are not without disadvantages. Generally speaking, well-designed assessment centers are a relatively expensive way to hire managers. As such, they are not reasonable alternative for many smaller organizations. Moreover, there are circumstances in which less costly and less administratively complicated techniques are just effective in managerial selection. Therefore, they are frequently not the technique of choice, even for organizations that have the resources to utilize them.
Cost-benefit analysis for the selection decision. Once our organization has made a commitment to investigate what types of selection devices it will use, it must attempt to evaluate whether its efforts will be worthwhile. Ultimately, a large part of the answer to this question involves the utility of the selection process. Utility refers to the degree to which using a selection system improves the quality of the individuals being selected by the organization. Utility has two related components. Statistical utility is the extent to which a selection technique allows an organization to better predict who will be successful. Organizational utility, which is dependent, in part, on statistical utility, is a matter of cost and benefits. In other words, answering the question whether the selection system should be developed and used is ultimately an issue of whether it saves the organization more money than it costs. Generally speaking, an analysis of the cost versus the benefits of selection requires estimates of the direct and indirect costs associated with the selection system. Direct costs include such things as the price of the test, the salary paid to an interviewer, and the equipment used in a work sample test. Indirect costs include changes in public image associated with implementing procedures such as drug testing.
The organization must also estimate how much money it will save by hiring more qualified employees using the selection system. These savings can come from improved outcomes such as higher levels of quality or quantity of output, reduced absenteeism, lower accident rates, and less turnover. Sometimes when our organization managers see how costly systematic selection can be, they wonder whether it will ever have benefits. The answer to these basic questions depends on many factors. But valid selection procedures can yield enormous benefits, especially in selection where the direct and indirect costs of hiring a poor performer are high. Imagine the costs associated with a single wrong hiring decision when airlines are selecting pilots. Pilot's error can cost the company millions of dollars in destroyed or damaged equipment, and no amount of money can offset the potential loss of human life that may be involved. One final note about selection and cost-benefit analysis of it. The way that an organization hires employees is directly tied to other human resource program. Perhaps the most important linkage is when training. Many trade-off decisions must be made between selection and training. At the very least, the organizations should realize that putting more money into selection can significantly reduce the amount of money it must spend on training, especially if the increased commitment to selection allows the organization to hire a more capable workforce. Job analysis helps you capture job-relevant responsibilities and critical competencies for success so you can determine appropriate selection tools and develop sound rationale for your selection process.